we've been able to talk a lot throughout our friendship and professional relationship, but this is the first time I've been able to do it with a clipboard. So
Wow. Well, I just have to preface this by saying how lucky am I to be alive right now? And how lucky am I that we're in a situation where you're the moderator and I'm not the moderator.
I'm not used to this side of the table. I will do my best, sir.
For this fun turn.
We are never short on conversation when we are able to chat. I have the privileged and unique experience of having been able to be produced by you and to have been able to know you both on and off the stage. And so there are things that hit me as somebody who's been lucky enough to call you my friend for the last, I would say, 5 years or so. We met, COVID happened, and then we met again, and we were able to work together. But the book is absolutely wonderful. To be able to read about what has made you you after getting to know you. There are so many things that make so much sense about the character of who you are. Producing, working with anybody in the arts, it can be a mixed bag when you're collaborating. And you can count sometimes on one hand the people that you get to work with who are doing it the right way when nobody's looking. And so to know you, to be able to do this with you, and then to be able to read about your life and read about all the things that I and all the other readers who are going to dive into it will now get to know, was really, really fun. And so thank you for having me. I'm going to ask you some questions now. Because I can't wait to dive into the creative process, and I can't wait to dive into the production element, certainly our collaboration and the other collaborations you've had on stage. You open the book with a place called the Cardboard Village, that there was a story that absolutely broke my heart, where a teacher was asking the class about who's heard of Oak Park. Did I get this right? And you were sitting in silence, because you did not want anybody to know that that's where you were at the time. And you were waiting for the question to pass you by. And it is a place that you found yourself. What is the Cardboard Village?
Oak Park was a very nice middle-class Jewish community just north of 8 Mile. And many of you may have seen Eminem's movie 8 Mile. And Oak Park begins at 8 Mile and basically ends at 10 or 11 Mile. And in Oak Park, most of the houses were very nice middle-class houses that would look a lot like houses that are in LA, with 3 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms and a family room and a basement and maybe a garage. But there was this one neighborhood in Oak Park that was built on the cheap. And the houses were built on concrete slabs. There were no basements. And they were built of the tar shingles you might see on the roof instead of bricks. And they would have they were about 800 square feet. They would have one teeny tiny bathroom and maybe a carport. And that was this one enclave in Oak Park. And the kids started calling it, I don't know what kid, what poet. He was a mean poet.
And if that mean poet is watching now, screw you, kid.
Yeah. But named it Cardboard Village, so the kids would say, oh, you live in the village. And what was also particularly painful for me is that we didn't start in the village. We started in the nicer neighborhood, but had to move there after my father suffered a life-changing, tragic motorcycle accident in which he crashed on I-94 when the front tire broke. I'm going to start like disassociating as I tell you this story. He crashed onto I-94 head first and survived against the odds, but suffered brain damage, a certain kind of aphasia or dementia, lost, he couldn't control his feelings, his temper anymore, and we wound up on welfare. And my mom had to go work at McDonald's. And that's what drove us to have to move to this place the kids called Cardboard Village. And I was so ashamed to have to say where I live. I was so embarrassed that if someone said, where do you live? I would like freeze up and clench to have to say that that's where I live. And what had happened with this was a religious school teacher at the Sunday school who used Cardboard Village as his example for the Warsaw Ghetto.
And you say you don't blame that teacher now. You think that...
It was a failure of imagination.
Right.
He could not imagine that there was any young Jewish kid at Temple Israel of Detroit who could possibly be so poor he would live in Cardboard Village.
Right. Yeah.
And I grew up with so much shame around it that when I decided to write this book, I realized the only way through it was to start right there.
Yep.
And so it's the first 2 words in the book.
It's a visceral beginning to what winds up being such an extraordinary story of where you started and where eventually you become.
Yeah.
You found the spark for a lot of your inspiration early on, and your dad, for all his eccentricities and all of
That's
his
a nice word, Josh.
erratic behavior that you write about, if you had something you wanted to do, he'd say, get in the car, right? He would say, get in, and we're going to go. So he gets credit for that. I think.
Huge.
And he took you to a Purim play audition, right, at Temple Israel. And I love this story because first of all, I thought that was applause. It was bottle dropping. Thank you. You met a really wonderful teacher at that school.
Eleanor Glazer.
That's right, yeah. I always remember, we were talking backstage about the teachers that we remember and the ones that stick with us. What was it about Mrs. Glazer that turned on the light for you at that pivotal time in your life?
She was professional. Like, she took it seriously. Right, she had, like, her hair was like that dun brown hair that's kind of in a swirl that looks like brown cotton candy above your head. And I remember she had the kind of glasses with the strings hanging down, and she had red lipstick, and for her, this was serious business. Even though we were 4th, 5th, and 6th graders, this was serious business. And she had a creative flair. So in this year that I was auditioning for the first Purim play so this temple gave me great gifts in addition to this shame and humiliation. But when I went to audition for this play, I didn't know yet at age 9 that though I was a good reader in English class, I didn't know you have to read with feeling, like that it's now infused with feeling. But they juxtaposed the story of Queen Esther with South Pacific. So Queen Esther sang about King Ahasuerus, I'm going to wash that man right out of my hair. And I was a sailor in the chorus.
Yes.
And I guess they decided that we were too young to sing There's Nothing Like a Dame.
All right.
So they chose for us a song from HMS Pinafore. We sail the ocean blue, and our saucy ship's a beauty.
Why not?
Of course.
Yeah.
So it was like, step, hop, hop, step, hop, hop. And my first experience being in a play, therefore, was Rodgers and Hammerstein, Gilbert and Sullivan, and the Old Testament.
Yeah, right.
Thank you, Andrew Lloyd Webber.
Did your sailor have a name?
No.
You just were just sailor.
Sailor number 4.
Oh, so we have in common, Jeffrey, that my first role ever was a sailor in Anything Goes.
Oh,
and I was
the best.
I was sailor number 5, but I asked them if my sailor could have a name, and they just said Jack. I said, great, Sailor Jack. Put it in the high school playbill.
Maybe we have to do Anything Goes so you can play Billy.
That or Jack again.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, sure. Yeah, that sounds fun. How many years passed between those experiences and you finding yourself at camp? Because I'm a camp kid, and you went to a wonderful camp called Camp Tamarak.
Yes.
In Michigan. I went to Interlochen in Michigan, so we're also we
we
share the Michigan.
We were in the same state those summers. I probably was. I'm older than you, so I'd already left.
I could be your teacher.
Yeah.
What was your experience like there? Was that one of the places your dad said get in the car?
Yeah, so no, that was me becoming the drama teacher in between freshman and sophomore year at Michigan.
Right.
And they had a division for the oldest kids in camp, the kids that were rising ninth graders, called specialty. And the kids had to specialize. So for the 3-hour periods in the morning, you could either choose waterfront, sports, dance, and there wasn't dance, arts and crafts, or drama. And I taught the drama kids. And what was special about it was that we got to rehearse 3 hours a day, 6 days a week, except for Shabbat. And you could do something. So I kind of took a page out of Eleanor Glazer's book, and I treated it seriously, like, this is professional, kids.
Yeah.
And I remember we would stand in that circle and we would do the theater games together, and we would throw the imaginary ball around, and then we would get to work on the play. And it was the first time I directed a play, and and then of course I chose the plays, and then we would perform those plays not only at our camp, but at a camp for younger kids, and in Detroit at the JCC for the parents. We'd get a few performances. But what I remember so clearly about it is that I was taking it so much more seriously than any of the other counselors who were doing Waterfront and the Maccabia games and all that other stuff. And we get to the, we're getting to toward the end of the session, and I want more time with the kids, and then they take away a whole day with me for the all-day sports day, the Maccabia. And I went to the program director of the camp, and I said, can I get my kids off? I need to rehearse. And he said yes. But then all the other counselors in the specialty village kind of revolted against me. And the British counselor, Lydia, she was just like Margaret Thatcher. She was like, Jeffrey, you are losing we are losing the coalition of the village. This is breaking down our village coalition. And I said, in 25 years, Lydia, do you think any of these kids at Waterfront or sports is going to remember what they did? Not one.
Wow.
But every fucking kid in my drama is going to remember this for the rest of their lives.
Absolutely. She retired on the spot. Yeah, I was going to say.
I lost. So the kids go to the Maccabia. They, blow their voices out.
Sure.
As you know.
Yes.
Screaming all day.
Yes.
They came back and they said, Jeff, we really wish we could have rehearsed with you. But it was at that moment that another counselor who was older, named Joel Coleman, who was also an older theater kid. He had played Tevye on the stage at Michigan, and he had done Caiaphas in a production of Superstar.
Yeah.
And he came to me and he said, it's not easy, kid, but read this book. And I said, what's this book? And it was like this, paperback that was had some torn pages and stuff. And it said Act 1 by Moss Hart. And I said, what's that? He said, just read it. And I'm like, who's Moss Hart? He's like, read the book. And of course, as we know, Moss Hart is the great collaborator with George S. Kaufman, who writes The Man Who Came to Dinner, You Can't Take It With You, wins a Pulitzer Prize, directs the musicals of My Fair Lady and Camelot. And writes A Star Is Born for Barbra Streisand and James Mason. And in this story, Moss Hart was this poor Jewish kid in the Bronx whose dad couldn't put food on the table. And he can't even go to college because they have no money. But he winds up as a theater director in the Catskills for all the folks going up to the Catskills in the 1920s. And he literally gets his start in the theater by directing plays in the Catskills. And, and that book became a guiding light for me in so many ways when I read it at age 18. And this book is inspired by that book. And I would like to think I appropriate it in all of the right ways.
That's amazing. You talk about identity a lot in the book, and there's a running theme of finding who you are. From your time directing at this camp, from the school before, learning you were adopted at 4 years old.
Yeah.
as you continue to evolve and find that, have things changed, your sense of identity over the years? Do they continue now? Do you find things now that you didn't expect? Do you find it while you were writing this book, for instance?
For me, I think that my life mission has been to feel whole, W-H-O-L-E. And I think I had to write this book to find out, where am I now? Where did I come from? How did I get here? And, I say that when I'm a child, so here we're like lining up all these versions of identity. I'm adopted. I'm a Jewish kid, but the unfortunate poor Jewish kid. I used to feel in my own family, in which I was the golden child, no question about it. I was the chosen child. But I also felt like a bit of an outsider. I didn't look like my family. I was a wispy, tiny, little blonde-haired, blue-eyed kid. I looked nothing like my family physically. I was, making Valentine trees to put on the wall in the bedroom in the winter while they were watching the Lions games on the TV in the living room. And, I used to say that that Sesame Street game, one of these things is not like the other. Well, that's me. And then, of course, I haven't even added on to it yet that once I am 15 years old and start adolescence late, which is another really embarrassing moment when you have to go do the gym in 9th grade and you haven't even started adolescence.
I was a boy soprano until I was 14, so
So you were there.
I get it. Yeah.
You and I were there, right?
Yeah.
The boys in the locker room who are afraid the other boys are going to make fun of you. It worked out.
Yes, it did.
But in any event, and then I realized, as I'm budding through adolescence, that I'm not like the other boys, and that I'm gay. So it's like all these identities, and all of them led to me feeling like an outsider.
But have you learned to embrace and celebrate the outsiderness? I've noticed also there's a theme in some of the shows that you choose. There are some wonderful outsider characters that you seem to lean into. We talk about, most recently, Sweeney Todd, Alexander Hamilton, Rent. These are outsider characters. And we'll talk about the theater in a minute. But do you find that personal journey that you've been on has shaped or influenced your artistic discoveries?
I think that I've always been trying to feel like I could finally feel in. And I don't mean that like the in crowd. I just feel like I'm part of a group. And I think that from going to that audition in the 4th grade to going to teach at Tamarak at age 18 to producing Rent and then the shows that follow it was all about my desire to find a group. And it took a long time. This book was finished, basically a year and a half ago. I turned 60 last October, and I think I finally feel like my identity is, in fact, W-H-O-L-E.
That'll be the name of the next book. Speaking of Broadway, at some point you decided, I have to get to New York.
Yeah.
How long was it between directing in Michigan to saying, I'm headed out east?
By the time I get like midway through college at Michigan in Ann Arbor, I want to point out that I went to New York once.
Yeah.
I got to go right after I graduated high school when my cousins Marty and Andrea sent me a ticket, a plane ticket, and handed me a ticket to see Dreamgirls right after the Tony Awards in 1982.
That's pretty cool.
So that was pretty cool.
Yeah.
And I still say that was the best experience I ever had in a theater. When I got to sit in the first row of the mezzanine and watch one of the most extraordinary groups of performing artists ever assembled.
I can only
Right,
imagine.
from
Hearing
Ben Harney and
those
Loretta Devine to Shirley
voices.
Ralph and of course the indomitable Jennifer Holliday. That was the first time I ever saw a standing ovation at the end of Act One. Think about it, folks. And but I hadn't. That was it. That was the only time I ever went to New York. And I knew by midway through college about guys like Hal Prince and Michael Bennett and David Merrick and Stephen Sondheim, and I knew that's where I wanted to be. But I also have this other memory, which is it's after sophomore year at Michigan, and I'm sitting listening to Sunny in the Park with George in my backyard, and so I'm sitting on one of those those backyard chairs that are that weird plastic that frays and it sticks to your skin when it's 90 degrees outside and it feels gross. Well, I'm sitting in that chair. Now, I feel great because I'm listening to the Act One finale of Sunday in the Park with George. Sure. And I'm thinking about Broadway and, the Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob of Broadway, which is probably like, Hal Prince, Stephen Sondheim, and Michael Bennett. Sure. But I'm going, how am I ever going to get from here, from this frayed plastic chair in Cardboard Village to there? I have no money. God knows I have no connections. I don't know anybody. I'm like a kid in Oak Park. And it felt impossible. But you know what happens? You go to junior year at Michigan, and then you direct Grease, and then you write articles for the Ann Arbor News and the Michigan Daily, and you keep doing the kids at Tamarak the next summer, and then you write a musical with your friend Andrew Lippa because you have to just try that skill. And so I knew, okay, I got to get to New York.
Endlessly curious. Always learning.
I'm doing.
You wanted to be the Swiss Army knife
of
this profession.
I'm like writing lyrics.
Yeah.
I remember we were writing a musical called Our Heroic Man, which was kind of like a Jack and the Beanstalk musical. And I remember at that moment in time, I was so obsessed with Sweeney Todd, Josh, that I was using the rhythm of a little priest for the opening number.
You wouldn't be the first, probably.
Yeah. It was all in three.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It was all in three.
Yeah, sure.
But in any event, I'm doing everything.
Yeah.
And I'm realizing that, oh my God, I'm going to graduate from Michigan and I'm going to have a poli-sci major with a theater minor. I've been in shows, I've directed shows, I've produced shows, I've written articles. I am unemployable.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
I am unemployable, and I have a guaranteed student loan payment that starts exactly 6 months after graduation, which you all know who did this, right? You graduate May 1, November 1, send in your check to Wachovia Financial Services. Yeah. And I was scared, but I thought, okay, be logical. Yep. I wrote articles. I had a lot of stories I'd written. I knew I had written press releases. I had done publicity. I'll get a job in PR. Now, I didn't know how to get a job for Broadway PR because that was such a locked-in society. Right. So I just went to the graduate library, the business school at Michigan, and I found some book that had all the PR agencies in America, and I just literally started writing cold letters and sending 4 articles with a great cover letter. And I had a discipline. You have to do 10 a day. And finally I got some interviews lined up. And I went to New York and I had 4 interviews, and one of the firms offered me a job for $14,500 annual salary, $205 after taxes, $820 a month if you count, and health insurance. Because I had not had health insurance all through college because our family didn't have health insurance. So it's 1986. It's the height of the AIDS epidemic, and I was so frightened of getting sick. Yeah. And anyway, but I got that job. Yeah. And that's how I got to New York. So you get that foothold.
What would you tell to young students who are also endlessly curious, want to try a little bit of this, want to try a little bit of that, but are also afraid that if you tap into too many things, you'll be a blur? to somebody that
Yes.
wants to hire you. Did you feel like there were regrets from doing that, or do you feel like at the end of the day, all of those things led to one singular you?
I can't but only think that every single experience I had led to my skill and talent and luck. Luck is such a big part of it, folks, as a producer. And a producer has to do so many things. So for me, it was all perfect training. Would that be the same if one wants to be a dancer? No.
Right.
Right? Would that be the same if one wants to be an opera singer? Absolutely not.
Right. But did you know did you have producer dreams at that
Yeah,
point?
but you know what?
Did you not know that like all of those things, actually what you were becoming was that?
Yeah. By the middle of college, I knew I wanted to be what we would have called back then a producer-director, like Hal Prince.
Right.
I knew it.
Right.
And I remember reading his book, Contradictions, which he wrote, frankly, in 74, 75.
Right.
He wrote it from about his career only from the beginning of doing the Pajama Game in 1953 or something like that, all the way through when he did that Candide production.
Right. Sure.
So I was starting to learn, and of course, I had that in that unforgettable experience of watching the nightly news on a late night in August of 1980 when the great Broadway show 42nd Street opened. And what Gower Champion did, let me take that back. What happened with that show was that the day of the show, the director choreographer, the great Gower Champion, had died. And the producer, David Merrick, didn't tell anybody. He didn't tell the cast. He didn't tell the leading lady who was having a relationship with Gower Champion. And they did the performance at the Winter Garden that night. And when the show was over, during the curtain call, the audience was screaming and throwing flowers. And David Merrick came out from stage right. And he tried to quiet the audience down. And they were just cheering and cheering and cheering. And he said, "No, I have bad news." And then they laughed. And they thought he was being sarcastic. And he said, "No, I am here to tell you that Gower Champion died today." And the cast screamed. And the audience gasped. And every news camera was there. And that story was telecast all over America that night, which is something that would never happen for a Broadway show. And that night, I was home with my mom and dad, and we were watching the Channel 7 Eyewitness News when Diana, I'm forgetting her name, but anyway, when Diana, the hostess, said, "And now we're going to tell you what just happened in New York," and they played the footage, and I watched that. And, I watched a producer at work. And on that night, he made 42nd Street into the most famous musical in the world. Wow. And he made it into the gigantic mega hit that it became.
I would imagine there is so much planning involved, but then those abilities to be able to think instinctively, to think on your feet, and to be able to juggle all of the drama of life that happens around a show. The thing that's been so incredible for me to have been part of the Broadway community is to see the living, breathing life form that a show becomes, from its inception to the talks you have at the very beginning, all the way through deciding you're going to back something and you're going to give your all, and then developing a team. And then what the audience doesn't see are the moments that shape our whole existence. Coming in from stage door, the lives of people are leaving when they come in. And as the producer, you are the person everybody goes to, no matter what point of light they're coming from, to say, what do we do? To you, what makes a producer? Because in music, a producer can mean a number of different things. In theater, there are a number of people who probably call themselves producers. Some people are hands-on, some people are hands-off. To you, what is the kind of theater producer you aim to be? What is a producer to you?
Number one, I'm going to give you three things. The first is who picks the play. The producer picks the play. And that choice of what play to do is my opportunity to express
Your
my
taste.
values.
Your taste, your values.
My values.
Yeah.
And what kinds of stories I want to help put out into the world. So the most important expression for me will be, what do we do? And I learned that in 8th grade when I was in the youth theater play, this dumb play called Popcorn Pete, and I didn't think it was very good. And I
Popcorn
said,
Pete?
Yeah, Popcorn Pete.
Can we revive Popcorn Pete? I would like...
Yeah. Can you
Listen,
believe
forget
it?
anything goes. Popcorn Pete has my name written all over it.
But at least, but I was the Jack in the Box.
Oh, gotcha.
It was a step up from Sailor 4.
And that taught you to rise to the level of Popcorn Pete? Or you
No,
said to yourself, I'm never doing that again?
It taught me to say we can do better.
Yep.
What are we going to do?
Which is a theme
Can
you
we
have
do
throughout the book.
Can we
Yeah.
do better?
Yeah.
So A, there's picking the play,
Yeah.
and then B, there's being a parent. In so many ways, if I choose to do a new musical, I am there to nurture the composer, the lyricist, the book writer, the director, the choreographer, the music director. When do I praise? When do I compliment? When do I say, that's fantastic, keep going? And when do I use that opportunity to make a suggestion or a recommendation? And when do I pause and wait for them to ask, what do you think? And then when do I have the temerity to say, can we do better? And there's no rule book for that.
Right.
That's feeling. That's instinctual. But that sense of being a nurturer, a cheerleader, is integral to being a producer of new musicals.
I'll never forget when we first performed our very first run-through in the rehearsal room of Sweeney Todd.
Yeah.
And we were in our, we were in a coat and sweatpants and our stage shoes, and we've got just plywood, the bridge was plywood and
set.
a fake chair, exactly. And it was you and it was a few other people that were sitting there, and you said to us afterwards, everyone in this room right this minute, we all have a secret. We have a secret of what this is, and we get to hold on to it until we give it to the rest of the world. And it really dawned on me, what a cool job you specifically have to be able to be on that perch and, again, decide when to be hands-on, decide when to trust the room, but to nurture the things that inspire you, that inspire your values. There are a few very good examples of that in your career, but it started with your friend and artistic collaborator, the late, great Jonathan Larson. Yeah. Somebody who, when you heard a performance of his very first piece, Boho Days, something triggered in you that value. Something triggered in you something that you said, I want to be responsible for other people hearing this voice. Can you tell us a little bit about what that felt like?
Yeah. In the fall of 1990, I'm going to just paint a picture for a second of where I was. In the fall of 90, I'm 25 years old, and I've been working as a booking agent for Barry and Fran Weissler, the Broadway producers, which means that I was helping to book the national tours of Topol and Fiddler on the Roof and Robert Goulet in South Pacific, and a lot of these revivals with stars. And I was making a living, and I was paying those guaranteed student loan payments. And I was doing shows with my friends at night in churches and in synagogue basements around Manhattan. But I was not happy. I wanted to be a producer, but I had to be a booker. And I thought, how am I ever going to make the transition to being a producer? I still have no money. I still don't know any rich people. Broadway is barely producing any new musicals right now. All we have are the British imports. Broadway, basically from 1981 to 96, is held up by 4 musicals: Cats, Les Mis, Phantom, and Saigon. And I'm in despair at my job, but I have to keep it. I've just broken up from my first 6-year relationship. And when you're 25 and you break up from a 6-year relationship, you're afraid that you're never going to meet anyone again. You're going to be lonely for the rest of your life.
Of course.
And it was in this state of uncertainty that my friend Beth said, hey, I'm going to this thing tonight. And I look at the flyer and it says, Boho Days, a rock monologue by Jonathan Larson. And I'd never even seen the words monologue and rock next to each other before. Like, it was like, whoa, well, I guess one person is doing it, and it's going to be done through rock music. I was like, that sounds cool, let's go. So we go up to this little space, and there's a piano and a bass and drum and that kit. And then out comes this tall, lanky, curly-haired guy with big ears, and he like attacks the piano ferociously. And what's the story he's telling? It's his 30th birthday. And all he hears in his head is tick, tick, boom. He's afraid his head is going to explode. Why? Because he's a 30-year-old composer of rock musicals that nobody will produce. Because he lives in a 4th floor walk-up where the bathtub's really in the kitchen and all the roommates have to exchange time in the kitchen so they can take a shower. He doesn't have health insurance. And he's in a relationship with a girl that he knows is safe, but he's asking himself, do I have the guts to break up and be lonely, or do I stay because I'm afraid of being lonely? And then finally, his best friend offers him a job as a copywriter at an ad agency. And he thinks, well, if I take this job, I can get a better apartment, I can have a real life, and I can finally get somewhere. Do I hang on to my art? Do I keep writing rock musicals that nobody wants to produce? Or do I go take this job as a copywriter? And that becomes the major dramatic question of this one-man show. And but everything I just said to you is sung with the most amazing songs that make the hair on my arm stand up, and I'm crying and I'm cheering and I'm going, I've never met this guy before, and how is he telling my life story? So I wrote him a letter the next day saying, I'm Jeffrey Seller and I want to produce your musicals. And then 2 weeks later, it's the day after I turned 26. I remember the date because my birthday was the day before, and they'd given me a cake at the office like they do on birthdays. And now it's the next day, and I'm in the conference room eating my carrots and celery for lunch. Still cannot afford a deli sandwich, not on your life. And in walks my boss, Susan, and she has one of those business envelopes. And she says, we have to talk. And I freeze for a minute, like, oh. And she said, we all know you want to be a producer, you don't want to be a booker, and I don't think you should be here anymore, and we're going to let you go. And my heart skips a beat. And I'm shocked, and I'm scared, and I'm thinking about paying the rent, and not that rent. That comes later.
That rent definitely paid the rent. Yeah.
And I say to her, so I guess Friday will be my last day. And she said, no, you can leave now.
Oh, man.
And hands me, here's 2 weeks severance.
Wow.
And as this is happening, the intercom comes on because I'm not in my office. And when you're not in the office, they do like the all call. And on the all call, the receptionist says, Jeffrey, Jonathan Larson on line 6.
Come on.
And I couldn't take it because I was being fired by Susan. So I said, take a message. And when I got home, I called him back. I said, hi, Jonathan, this is Jeffrey Seller. He said, how are you? I said, I don't know. I was just fired. He said, is that a good thing or a bad thing? And I said, if I am to believe anything I heard in your show the other night, it's got to be a good thing.
Wow.
And that was the beginning of our professional friendship.
That's unbelievable. Rent. You mentioned rent. Thus began a beautiful friendship. And thus began the creative process for him that changed the course, I would say, and many people would say, of Broadway forever. As you said, it was a time period where these 4 pillars of shows, these shows that were coming in, were becoming museum pieces. And there was as there is, sometimes is, and I feel it maybe is even now, a resistance to change the status quo of what was working on Broadway. So to decide to back something that was so groundbreaking, so different, that could easily have been an enormous swing and not found an audience. That's always the risk. Did you know going in, as you were hearing the music of Rent, as it was starting to develop, did you say to yourself, boy, if this doesn't resonate, then I don't know what's what? At what point did you realize that you had something really, really special?
Oh gosh, not early. You know, when we go to make a new musical, we're just trying to make a good musical.
Yeah.
We're not thinking about history or the future. We're just trying to make a good musical. And I loved Jonathan's idea for Rent from the moment he said he wanted to do La Boheme in the East Village, where Mimi has AIDS instead of tuberculosis. I was down with that idea from the get-go. And it was not a process that was just always straightforward. The very first time Jonathan did a reading of Rent was in the spring of '93, and it didn't go so well. It was long, the theater was 90 degrees, the plot was not yet coherent, the characters were not yet coming through. It opened with the song Rent, so it opened with that wallop, but then immediately it got lost when the next song was Santa Fe, and you didn't know, why are we going to like homeless people in Santa Fe? Like, it didn't make sense yet. And I brought two people to that reading in '93. One was this guy who was an Australian producer. He was a young man in his 20s, but I knew that his mother owned the largest theater chain in London. So I thought, if I get this guy to like it, he'll be our money guy. Yeah. He left at intermission. Oh. He was like, oh, I'm sorry. You know, I didn't know it would be this long. I have a terrible Australian accent. What he was really saying is, I hate this and I can't get out of this theater fast enough.
Yeah. And he's used to the heat living there. I mean,
yeah.
You know, it's
all right, Perth.
Yeah. Oh.
Anyway, he leaves. At the end of the show, another guy I bring, who's a director, says, I think Jonathan's so talented, but he should just start working on something else. So when I go to Jonathan to go have burgers at Diane's Hamburgers, you know, a week later, I'm thrust right into that question about how to communicate. How do I praise, and how do I interlace that praise with the right not suggestion, the right observation? And ultimately, after I said how great the songs were, I said, I can't tell the story. Do you want to write a collage of life in the East Village, or do you want to write a play? He was like, of course I want to write a play. He was angry, frankly, that I would even ask the question. And I said, well, then you've got to write the plot. And I think he probably was bruised and went away a little indignant. And he was like, I'll show you.
Yeah.
And guess what he did?
Yeah.
But it's not linear. And then when we saw the next workshop in 18 months later, whoa, that was when Mimi comes in to sing Light My Candle with Roger. And when you hear that, and they start that song, you have never heard a rock duet that sounds like that and accomplishes what that does.
Yeah.
That sense of character, that sense of story, that sense of romance. And it was right then that my business partner, Kevin, and I said, now let's go do something.
Right.
But even then, so then of course, we make the deal to do it at New York Theater Workshop.
Sure.
We make we make the cassette, back when we still had cassettes, of that we record that entire performance. So that we have that, and that cassette kind of becomes Kevin's and my like soundtrack for our life back then.
But at some point, as a producer, also you must at some point feel the buzz of those first audiences, that something is here.
Yeah, but that's not how it went. And I'm gonna and because Jonathan died 3 hours after the final dress rehearsal. Nothing was normal.
Right.
We were laden with grief. I met his parents the day he died, when they got on that plane and came right to New York. And, Nan and Al Larson said to me at intermission, their son had died less than 24 hours ago. You have to do this play. This is Johnny's play. You have to do it. And we did. But those first audience, so our first performances were changed by the tragedy that we were all living through. And then we got to a regular audience, and they might not have even known what happened.
Right.
And they were pretty good, but there were issues. They couldn't track time and place in those early previews. They were having a hard time with the very Brechtian rock concert style that helped. They couldn't tell where we were moving because we were moving from one location to another so fast. And Jonathan wasn't there to help rewrite. So director Michael Greif and music director Tim Weil, they would get together and work, and the Larsons gave them permission to make the changes they needed. And one of the most ingenious and teeny things that Michael did was to help set time and place. He had Anthony Rapp, who was playing Mark Cohen, just read the stage directions because he was our narrator anyway. Wow. So now he could tell us, now we've moved from the loft to the lot. Huh. And that was not in the original show. Those were Jonathan, and so he wound up reading Jonathan's writing.
Right.
And those are the kinds of changes you make during previews.
Right.
But I had people go to previews 4 or 5 performances in and look at me with a sad face saying, your show's not very good and I'm sorry your friend died. They didn't say that. I'm just saying that's what I perceived. When people are looking at you, so you don't know. And then you keep trimming, honing, focusing, the lighting's getting better, the direction's getting clearer. And then maybe a week and a half in, Joe Mantello, who I don't even know that well, the great Broadway director, calls me and he says, I saw the show. It's the next to chorus line. And I'm like, what? He's like, it's the next to chorus line. I was like, well, that's not what those people said to me on Thursday night. He said, don't listen to a word they say. They don't know what they're talking about. And it starts to turn. But I want to say something else. When Jonathan and I would talk about the future of Rent, we never once talked about Rent on Broadway. We thought Rent would be in like a garage of 300 seats somewhere in the East Village, and it would be for all the young people that it's written about. It was only later, as we got closer to the opening at New York Theater Workshop, that Kevin, my business partner, and I would stand in the back and we'd watch the cast create that beautiful East Village life and watch 15 people sing Seasons of Love across that stage and start to go, this is a Broadway show. This is about big ideas. And this should live on Broadway.
Wow.
But that came later.
Yeah.
And
when you look back at a legacy of a show and the mythology of it, and having been a fan of it since it was on Broadway, not having been there for the journey of it before, it's easy to wrap all the emotions of it into one, bow.
Yes.
But it's fascinating to know, and especially for those that are watching or listening or perhaps getting into the theater, that those moments of aha, those moments of yes, it belongs, don't come without a lot of moments of wondering why, what if, this needs to work, this needs to trim. I did a show called Natasha Pierre and the Great Comet of 1812, and so I got to see the transformation from seeing it in a very, very small environment, somewhere like Ars Nova and the tent, and the trim that comes from doing a great work by another great composer, Dave Malloy. It also reminds me of seeing Hamilton at the Public, one of the very, very lucky few audiences that got to see it during that time. Of course, we all knew at the Public very early that something transformational was taking place. Yeah. I think that's one of the reasons why I was surprised to hear that answer about Rent, because at the Public there was a palpable energy for the music and the story that was happening there. What is it about really bad elevator pitches of story ideas that turn into the greatest musicals of all time? I was with Tommy Kail at a hockey game, and he says, you really should come to this workshop we're doing. It's a hip hop musical about Alexander Hamilton. Yeah. And of course, I had seen Freestyle Love Supreme, and I knew Lynn's comedy chops, and so I said, is it a comedy? That sounds hilarious. And he said, no, actually, it's quite poignant, and it's actually quite beautiful to see it. Sondheim's another example of, there's a barber who kills people, meat pies. You're going to love it.
Yeah. Barbarism.
Barbarism. Or George Seurat, sure, why not?
Eva Peron.
Eva Peron, exactly right. You talk about, having the wherewithal to know and believe in a composer and believe in a story early on. Your relationship with Lynn, of course, now is stuff of legend, but starting within the Heights, you believed in his ability to tell a story, to find a story and tell a story very quickly. When you read something like the Hamilton book,
yeah.
Did you feel at all like I did in that hockey game, or was there a cohesive?
There is a moment where a producer bets on an artist and follows that artist. Of my 4, I've probably done about 12 shows, which isn't that many over 30 years. But
the track record is amazing.
But the 4 big musicals that won the Tony and had an enormous impact, none of them are my idea. It's me cheerleading, nurturing the artist who comes up with the idea. Because when the artist comes up with the idea, the work is always better. And so know that.
Yep.
It's and that's I think a very, very important component to how success happens. So by the time Lynn comes up with the idea of Hamilton, it's just Lynn's next show.
Right.
You know what I mean? Because I'm already on that train with him because we've already done In the Heights. And here's what I want to say about all 4 of my musicals that won the Tony. If all the producers had believed in Rent, I wouldn't have been the producer because I was Mr. Nobody.
Right.
Nobody wanted to do it. Nobody believed, except for Kevin and me and Jim Nicola. Avenue Q, a show with puppets. When we said we were going to, it had opened off Broadway. It got a very warm review in the Times. It was doing fine in a 120-seat theater. When we said we were going to Broadway, people thought we were out of our minds. A year later, we won the Tony for Best Musical, and we beat Wicked. Then we go and do In the Heights, which is a hip-hop musical that takes place in Washington Heights about a community of Puerto Rican, Dominican, Cubano people. And people think they're going to take that show to Broadway. They're out of their minds. And that wins the Tony. So all these shows were not intuitively obvious. In the same way, and of course that's how Hal and Steve worked for all those years. Sure. And by the way, Hal and Steve's shows in the 70s were not as successful as Annie or Pippin or A Chorus Line. Sure. But they always worked on finding the idea that makes the artist feel passion.
And a good scared, I would imagine. Following your compass to the stuff that scares you in the right way. Thank you for choosing a revival, by the way.
We could talk about that.
I'm grateful that through all of your forays into experimental shepherding and championing of new work, what was it about Sweeney Todd that made you decide you wanted to then take on a revival of the size that we were thinking of doing?
Yeah. Well, first of all, when I was a junior in high school, the 2 LPs, the double albums that I would listen to basically alternating were Evita and Sweeney Todd. Yeah. And Sweeney Todd, for those of you that don't know, won the Tony in 1979, and Evita won it in 1980. And Hal directed both, although actually Evita he had directed first in London. But in any event, my friends and I would just listen to both those albums back and forth.
Sure.
And of course, my mother said, one of them is about Eva Peron, and one of them is about cannibalism. Yep. What is wrong with you people? She was like, what is wrong with you people? But so it held this enormous place for me.
Yeah.
And then when I got the great opportunity to meet Josh Groban and then start talking with Josh and Tommy Kail, my great collaborator on Hamilton and In the Heights.
Who said, if Jeffrey's not on this, I'm not sure I want to do it. The depth of your relationship and the trust for a collaborator like Tommy, to know that you're in good and nurturing hands, to know that the person at the perch is going to be able to reach in and out in ways that are artistically sound, and all of the guesses are from the best place. Was really, really.
But who do you want to talk to every morning?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Right, because there's a morning call at 8 o'clock, and it's who you want to call.
It's a no asshole policy.
So we all, Tommy and Josh and I, we all met before COVID here in LA.
That's right.
I remember that nice meeting. And then we all had COVID and a million things. but one thing was clear to me. We have to answer why. Mm-hmm. Why?
Yeah.
And if we can't come up with a good why are we doing this, we can't do it.
That conversation was so illuminating for me because I always ask the same question. For me, it's if I can't figure out a why, I don't want to be a part of it. And sometimes you're the only one to be wondering the why when everybody else is saying go, go, go. To meet somebody that also wanted to know why and also wanted to talk about what do we have to offer that makes it special? What can we do with it that brings a side of it that either hasn't been seen in a very long time or is entirely new? How do we humanize this in a way that is different? That conversation was so inspiring. That conversation sustained me through a global pandemic and gave me something to think about and ruminate on through those two traumatic years.
Well, what's amazing in my memory of that, Josh, first of all, the opportunity to bring Josh to Broadway is a why enough, right? If you can get Josh to Broadway, that answers why.
No, listen. I am an off-Broadway popcorn Pete at best. I want you
Not
to know,
anymore. Not anymore,
with
fellow.
the right people around me, I can do okay.
But the other thing that we all talked about and that I was pretty steadfast on, even though it would cause it to be a huge risk, was that we had at that moment 3 revivals in New York over the last since I got there. There was the one they called Teeny Todd, which was at Circle in the Square in the late 80s. I saw it. It was very good. It got nice reviews. Then they did the Patti LuPone one with a tuba. I didn't even know what was going on the stage.
It was great. It was awesome.
But it was good. Yeah. But I remember when I saw that Patti LuPone one with Michael Cerveris, that John Doyle production, it was a teeny production with all them playing instruments, and there were 2 young women in front of us. And when the curtain came down, that one woman turned to the other and she said, I have no idea what just happened on that stage for the last 2.5 hours. And what she meant is she couldn't track the plot. She couldn't track time and place because he went so minimalistic, no one knew what was going on. And Sweeney Todd is driven by plot. So, and then there was the one in the pie shop that they did at the Barrow Street Theater. So I said to you guys, and I'm sure you had already said it, the only way to do it now is go big.
Right.
Let's give the world back what Steve and Hal created in '79 with the entire 26-member orchestra and a full company. We have to make an epic again. Yeah. And only by going big will we differentiate and create something that has, the gimmick was go big. Yeah. And
that orchestra, be able to go big with the music as well, to be able to.
Yeah, and then to have Josh Groban and Annalee Ashford and Ruthie Ann Miles and this extraordinary group made, you know what it made? Another magic trick. Yeah. And to go back to what you say about what we do as producers, I have this strong memory of standing in the back of the house with Tommy during a preview, and the show is on fire. And Josh and Annalee are doing a little priest, and the audience is howling with laughter. And I said, this is a miracle, Tommy, you know that. And the miracle is when it all comes together. When the quality is that good, when the audience is responding, when the ticket sales are there, and the press loves it too. And getting all that to align with a musical doesn't happen every time, and it doesn't happen 1 out of 2 times. And
It's wild.
it was a wonderful miracle.
A wonderful miracle. We both are big proponents of arts education, and we both are obviously so thankful for our teachers.
Gosh.
And there are so many young creators, actors, fledgling producers, directors who look up to you. And there is, in fact, the head of my foundation, Find Your Light, Jeffrey, who's in the audience somewhere. I don't know where you are, Jeffrey. But yes, Jeffrey's son is actually studying in London to be a theater producer. Of all the things that you've learned, we talk about, good scared, the instincts. Now is a very strange time to be entering the world of theater, to be coming back into it post-pandemic, where it's easier said than done to feel like a renegade out there, to be wild, to be good scared, to find the Jonathan Larson, the Lin-Manuel Miranda, and say yes to things that are going to be a journey to get to where it needs to be. What would you say to the young creators out there who are dreaming big but are feeling perhaps like, for economic reasons on Broadway, all the shifts and trials and tribulations that the theater community has gone through in the last couple of years? What advice would you give them going into the future of what?
It's very, very simple. Find your artistic friends and go make shows together. Go make a show in the basement of the Drama Bookshop, if you're Tommy Kail and Lin-Manuel Miranda, in your 20s. Go make a show at Road of Shalom on West 83rd Street, if you're me and Andrew Lippa in the 80s. You've got to get your group together. And it doesn't matter what's happening politically. It doesn't matter what's happening economically. It only matters that you guys get together and you damn the torpedoes and make your own shows. And all of the great successes on Broadway, not all of them, but so many of them came out of people making shows with their group, with their friends. And that is my big advice to all the young people.
Find your people.
Who want to do it. You have to find your people and then do it together.
Yeah.
And then you'll rise together.
Right. Yeah. And be fearless that way.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Carol asks, I'm interested in your comments on a Broadway show filmed live and airing on television, as Good Night, Good Luck is this weekend.
So far, it's been pure additive. Good Night and Good Luck is the play that George Clooney is starring in right now that is based on the screenplay he wrote and the movie he directed about 15 or 20 years ago. George made a decision to come to Broadway and do this play for 14 weeks. It's not going to tour. There will be no life after it closes. So what a gift that they're expending the effort to film this play. I think they're doing it live on CNN, maybe Friday night or Saturday night, I don't know, Saturday night. So all that does is help. And certainly when we made the big decision to make a live capture of Hamilton, I just had this memory of saying, what if you could have gotten a live capture of that cast in Dreamgirls? Wouldn't we love that today? But we don't. We didn't. But we did do it for Hamilton. And our goal was to wait over 5 years, maybe 10 years to put it out. And what ultimately had us put it out earlier than we expected was the COVID epidemic of 2020. And once I realized that Hamilton would not be out for 18 months minimum, when Ezekiel Emanuel wrote in the New York Times that it's going to be 18 months before we can congregate publicly again, we thought, well, let's give everybody this gift. And all it did was help Hamilton toward the future. Thank you.
Next question comes from Carl, who says, creating a Broadway show is very collaborative, from getting the resources to casting and staging it before it gets to Broadway. But writing a book is very different and largely solitary. What was that like for you?
Oh, wow, what a great question. At first I thought you meant writing the book to a musical, which is also really hard, folks. And remember, if you love the musical, all you remember is the music. And if you didn't like it, who was the book writer? It's not an easy job. But But in any event, I was the author, the director, the actor, the playwright, the producer of my own book. And suddenly I was challenged with this question, can you do better? And that meant you have to write a book that has a beginning, a middle, and an end, that has a major dramatic question at the beginning, that has rising action, and has a great climax. And not only did I have to write a book with a beginning and a middle and an end, but I had to make sure every chapter had a beginning and a middle and an end. So literally, I challenged myself with the same exact rigor that I use when I'm making a musical. Thank you for that question.
A follow-up to that is from Antonia says, was there anything you chose to leave out of the book and why?
You know what happens when you write a book is they always cut it. So the book was probably a third or a quarter longer, and it was my great editors and agents and my team who helped me really to hone down and show what was absolutely essential in the first part of my life. Because some people say, if you're going to read a memoir about your coming of age story in New York, get to New York. Nobody cares what happened before. Now, I do care about what happened before, and I felt the need to cover it, but I did compress it. So, yes, you always leave something behind. And frankly, at this point, I don't even remember what we left. So I think we left all the right things behind.
Bill asks, did you have a role in the decision to pull Hamilton from the Kennedy Center? Could you comment on that?
Lin-Manuel Miranda and Thomas Kell and I made that decision to pull Hamilton from the Kennedy Center. There was no... And I'm going to give you a little context. The Kennedy Center the idea for the Kennedy Center was hatched during Eisenhower's administration in the 50s. It took a long time for them to start construction in the late 60s. So it was hatched under Eisenhower, Republican. It was built under Richard Nixon, Republican. It opens under Richard Nixon's administration. And we all know that from that moment forward, it was a great non-political treasure that belonged to all of us. It was all of ours. And it was all of ours whether George W. Bush was the president or Bill Clinton was the president. And when we did Hamilton the very first time at the Kennedy Center, Donald Trump was the president, and he left it alone. And Deborah Rutter, a great executive director who was a professional, was running it. And David Rubenstein, who's frankly nonpartisan to begin with, he makes deals with Republicans and Democrats every day of his life, had been the chairman of the board for many years. And as many of you know, the board was made up of about 50-50 Democrats and Republicans. So at the very least, it was bipartisan, but really it was nonpartisan. And when that guy goes in there and he fires every single member of the board who's a Democrat, he fires Deborah Rutter, the professional executive director, he fires David Rubenstein, the longtime chairman of the board, and installs one of his political lackeys, this Rick Grinnell. Rick Grinnell had never had anything to do with the arts or entertainment in his life. He is an odious gay, is what he is. Who betrays our values every single day he's alive with his greed and his cruelty. When he installs Rick Grinnell and installs himself as the chairman of the board and then appoints all Republicans to make the Kennedy Center an arm of his agenda, we will not allow Hamilton's profits to serve his agenda. And if I get deported to El Salvador, you better come and get me.
You know, that reminds me of the speech you gave to that teacher in Michigan. And that battle you lost, and this one you won. So you've come a long way.
Oh, yeah,
you've come a long way. Yeah.
Yeah.
Steve asks, in LA, with film and television impacted by location and cheaper costs shooting in other locations, that's a huge threat. Broadway does not have that threat. What are Broadway's biggest threats other than, say, a pandemic?
Well, Broadway's biggest problem is that like higher education and like medicine, we are all labor intensive. So when you ask why is everything so expensive, because we always run ahead of inflation. I'm sorry, I forgot the word, but Freakonomics and Stephen Dubner labeled what this economic phenomenon is. If someone knows it, shout it out. It's something like that we're always inefficient. We can't get any efficiencies out of technology. In the same way that your flat screen TV prices can go down over the last 20 years, our prices can't go down. Because at the end of the day, I have 26 musicians in Sweeney Todd. I have 30 cast members at Sweeney Todd. I have 100 people at that theater, and they're all making a living wage. So I can't control that. So our threats always are cost, but here's the good news. We've had our greatest season on Broadway in both attendance and gross since before COVID. We had 13 new musicals open on Broadway this year that were eligible for Best Musical. Let me compare that. 13 new musicals. The year before Rent, in 1995, they had 2. And one of them was a revue called Smokey Joe's Cafe, which was Lieber and Stoller songs. So when they had the Tonys in 95, a year before Rent, friends, Sunset Boulevard won Best Book and Best Score by default. There were 2. And now 13. So look at how, and they only did like 8 million in attendance, and we did 14.5 million this year in attendance. So I'm an optimist.
We see things like Hamilton, we see things like Frozen is coming to Disney Plus soon, and we're seeing all of these different pro shots that are coming out. What is the likelihood that this will continue to happen, and will there be times where people can go from their home and live stream a Broadway musical? Like, could they see a house cam? Could they see things like this? Or is it just impractical because you'd have to pay everyone licensing and everything to keep those things
well, there have
running?
been a number of shows. Didn't Waitress have a live stream at some point? So we've had a smattering of them. They are hard to do because they are expensive to do, and often the producers don't have the capital to invest in them. But accessibility to me means getting more students in. Accessibility to me means the $20 ticket policy we created for Rent in 1996 for the 34 seats of the front row that lasted for the entire 12-year run, and then which we did for every single musical thereafter. Accessibility is the
Student matinees.
The 250,000 students from Title I schools who have been able to see Hamilton over all these years. And frankly, accessibility is also now the ability for kids to listen to these musicals on Spotify for free, on YouTube for free, and in all the places they're getting their music. And that's actually helping to spread musicals faster and deeper than it ever did when we were kids and we bought the LPs. Thank you very much.
Hi, I've got a question. Thank you so much for all your shows. I've loved them all. So right now I see Broadway shows are changing because a lot are star vehicles. You get a celebrity who comes on for a limited run of like 12 weeks.
Yeah.
And I'm concerned about this. I mean, if you're not living in New York, you can't see it, and then they come and go, and it seems like a trend or like something going on with that. What do you think about that? Do you think that's going to change theater, or it's supportive because it brings in audiences? I'm just concerned about it.
The vast majority of your shows have not been star-driven. They've created stars, but they haven't necessarily been marquee names.
Yeah. All the new musicals have not had stars. So Broadway has been a magnet for stars since the beginning, right? From the Luntz and all of that. Richard Burton and Elizabeth Taylor doing an ill-fated production of Private Lives in the 80s. I don't know if I didn't see it, but I remember reading about it. And Lord knows this has been the very starry year on Broadway, and those shows have been big financial successes, and the tickets are way too expensive. It is a trend. It's not, it ultimately doesn't nourish us long term, you're right. Because you know what nourishes Broadway long term? New musicals. The whole business is built on a new musical on Broadway, and then its ability to tour the US, to go around the world, and then to happen in your community theaters, high schools, middle schools, summer camps, colleges, and professional resident theater companies. That's why we still have My Fair Lady today. So all I can say about that is that my mission is new musicals, and because we have 40 theaters on Broadway, hey, if we have 4 plays a year that have stars in them, I say it's fine for the ecosystem as long as it doesn't become pernicious and eat everything else. Yeah, thank you.
Hi there. Producers do a lot of different things. What is your favorite thing to do as a producer, and what's the thing where you're like, oh, I wish I didn't have to do that?
My favorite thing is when I'm sitting with the authors in the beginning days and talking about and helping them figure out how to tell their story. I'm going to go work with a composer, lyricist, and a book writer next week. And my suggestion to them when they were getting ready to work this winter was, I said, go write the first 15 minutes. It's going to tell you how to write this musical. And I can't wait to see what they're going to show me. So that's my favorite thing to do. My least favorite thing to do is close the show. And I say that with great seriousness. There is a day for every show. Lion King may be the exception. But there is a day for every show when I have to show up at that theater and bring the company together in the first 2 rows and say, we're closing on such and such a date. And that's my least favorite thing. Thank you, sir.
And our final question for the evening.
Oh, do you know how much pressure is on you right now?
I'm not worried.
Okay.
I love what you said about identity a lot, about describing your book. You know, I heard you talking on another interview about the book, and you mentioned that if you want to do anything, including being in the military, you said, this book will help you be in it. I was in the military for 10 years, so I was in Iraq, Afghanistan. Your book wasn't around before.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to, kind of make it related to no matter what anyone in this audience or watching wants to do with their life. You mentioned several occupations that this will help you achieve your goals and your dreams. Could you talk a little more about that, like what you meant when you were talking about that, how this book can help you with whatever it is that you want to do?
Yeah, thank you, sir. Ultimately this book is my particular version of the American dream. This book is my particular story of how I got from Cardboard Village to Broadway, and the hard work that it took, and the perseverance it took, and maybe the anger it took, that anger of living in that house and coming from Cardboard Village. But also what I learned along the way by having to put myself through college and having to figure out, wow, how am I going to pay for my books and do that play and go do my work study and build my life. And I hope that this book is a guide in its own way to how to build one's life to get the most out of it. And I hope that this book will make anyone who has ever felt like they are outside feel like, oh, yeah, well, we all feel it. And we can build our lives such that we can feel inside. Thank you for coming tonight.